Holy cow. I feel like my face hasn't been on the internet in a while. Swiftness, greetings. How you doing?
Chapter 6. Zane's speech was not the last time.
Oh shit, I need my manuscript. Ugh. Yeah, tired. I feel that. Boy, do I feel that. Gotta go grab my laptop. Be right back. All right.
Chapter 6. Zane's speech was not the last time Ezra and her maidstones were mentioned that day. In Perrin's class just after breakfast, she spoke of it again and invited questions from the students. None were asked. The students were second years, and most were timid, and likely few of them knew anything of magestones at all. Eben withheld his tongue, because he knew more about magestones than he wished to, and he did not want to draw any attention to himself after the events of the night before. In the library that afternoon, Calum and Theron told him that their classes had been much the same, except in those cases, many questions had been asked, and Eben was chilled to hear that one student had asked if they could not use magestones against Ezra, to procure their own supply and thus defeat her. That idea had been immediately shouted down. but the fact that it had been voiced at all, Eben shuddered to think of such an idea being put into action. Well, he remembered the days after the attack on the High King's seat, when everyone had been fearful and solemn. Now that mood had returned again, only worse. Then they had been afraid of some enemy from far lands. Now a foe was in their very midst, and she had once broken bread with them all. She had slept beneath the same roof. And worse, no one knew where she had gone or where she might be. The weight of that terror was heavy upon them all. "I do not understand," said Eben. "How could she have vanished?" "No one knows," said Theron. "They only know that she did." "They say the academy was searched from top to bottom," said Caleb, "but she was not found in any room. They searched in teams, and all kept careful watch to make sure that she would not trick them with mind word, but they saw no trace of her." They studied in worried silence after that. It seemed an eternity before the final study bell rang. Eben rose from his armchair with a sigh of relief. He joined his friends in the dining hall, but found he had no appetite. He had an appointment that evening in the city. The events of the night before had made him reconsider going out, for Ezra might be anywhere. But in the end, Eben decided that Ezra would hardly expect him to be out in plain sight on the streets, and would not know where he was going in any case. He would only encounter her by the most terrible of luck, and even he did not think that poorly of his own fortune. So, with blood rising to his cheeks, he excused himself and left the hall. Caleb and Theron were too preoccupied to notice his embarrassment. Winter ran its persistent fingers up and down his skin as he stepped through the academy's front door. He quickened his steps to get the blood flowing and headed west towards the blue door, as he had so often before. Only now, he did not mean to pass through it. His heart skipped a beat, though the day's worries plagued his thoughts, and they were reluctant to leave him. He swore silently to himself that he would not spend the evening voicing such concerns to Adara. This night was about the two of them, not him alone. When at last he reached the blue door, Adara gave him a smile and a nod. The snow dusting her mantle told the tale of how long she had spent waiting. She had chosen to wear his family's color, a golden dress with a cloak that was a few shades darker. The hood was lined with fur, which she blew into to warm herself. The moment she saw Eben, her face lit like a kindled lantern. But then the light was doused at once, and she gave him a nervous smile. It pleased him a bit, the thought that mayhap she was as anxious as he was. "My love," she murmured. He took her in his arms. "Your love? I would argue that you are mine." Her smile broadened. Then she put his arm in hers and led him away. He expected another lengthy walk, but after only 2 blocks, she stopped before a wooden door, this one unpainted. It stood between a tavern on one side and a building on the other that looked like a cobbler's shop. The buildings were pressed tight together so that it seemed they crowded the door to Adara's home. "Here it is," she said breathlessly. "Would you like—" The words trailed off. She waved at the handle. Eben tried to speak, but his throat was suddenly bone dry, and so he gave it up. The handle turned easily under his fingers. The hinges gently squeaked as they swung open. There was a short staircase, short but steep. He tramped the snow off before he climbed its steps, thankful he had remembered.
What is a Tobuscus book? I am not familiar. Hi, Biscuit Grains. Good to see you.
He tramped the snow off before he climbed its steps, thankful he had remembered it and not made a slob of himself. A little railing helped him make the climb. And then there he was, Adara's home. It was small, but not cramped. He guessed she did not want for more space, since many of her needs were seen to by the Guild of Lovers.
Thanks for the follow. I appreciate that. I don't know what Tobuscus is.
The windows at the front of the room drew attention at once. Eben guessed that each looked out over the front door of the tavern and the cobbler's, respectively. The evening light, they admitted, illuminated the room so that it did not yet need lamps. Tucked in one corner was her bed. It was nothing so ornate as the silk-sheeted thing behind the blue door, though Eben noted with a blush that it seemed just as sturdy. On the other side of the room was a bureau, as well as a closet that stood out from the wall. Finally, before one of the windows was a small table with 2 chairs, behind which was a low cabinet that looked like it might hold wine, or, Eben realized, mead, for Adara favored it. Where there was color, sashes over the windows, the bureau's trim, the bedspread, it was deep, muted blue, the perfect contrast to the dress and cloak she now wore. Adara stood behind him now, hands clasped before her, fingers rubbing against each other anxiously. Her eyes were wide as they remained on him. It was so utterly unlike the Adara he was accustomed to. She smiled as he looked at her, though it seemed somewhat forced. "Well, I know it is nothing so grand as my room at the guild, nor certainly your family's. It is wonderful. It is just like you," he said quietly. Then he realized how that might sound, so he spoke hastily to correct himself. "I mean only that it is warm and beautiful, and does not seem to try too hard to be beautiful. Only that is not what I mean either, not at all. He put his hand to his forehead. She must think him an utter fool, or a caustic-tongued ass. But she smiled and took his hand, and then gently kissed the back of its fingers. "There is my Eben. I feared to see something different in your eyes, haughtiness or disdain once you saw how I lived. But you are just as tongue-tied as I feel." Eben laughed. "That is no compliment, yet I am glad to hear it from you." She studied his eyes. "Is it only our meeting that occupies your thoughts? I have heard some dark whispers concerning the academy." He sighed. "They cannot be darker than the truth." She waved him to the table before the window, and he sat. While she moved to fetch wine for him and mead for herself, he went on. "You remember what I told you of Isra? She has returned. We saw her within the academy. Caleb and Theron and I, that is." She froze in the middle of pouring his wine. He had to tip the bottle up to keep her from spilling it. "In the academy, you say? Does that mean you are in danger?" "I certainly do not feel safe," said Eben, forcing a laugh. "That, along with our situation with Dasko." "Have you thought of no way out of that?" said Adara. "It must weigh terribly on Theron." "More and more every day," said Eben, lowering his gaze. "She will hardly even speak of it, and when she does, she is short-tempered and irritable." "Would you not be the same?" "I do not criticize her," said Eben. "I wish there was a way I could help her. But if she releases him from Mindward, it will wear off. Then we do not know what would happen. He might remember us and what we did. We know for certain that he would suffer, for the process of weaning off Mindward is very painful." "Will it not get worse the longer she keeps him under control?" said Adara softly. "It will, but we know not what else to do." Eben's eyes began to smart, and he swiped at them, trying to make it look as though he were scratching an itch. "Forgive me. This is a happy evening, and one for celebration. Yet I have spent most of it talking about myself, as I do too often. I even told myself not to do so just before I saw you." "Do not trouble yourself over that," said Adara, giving him a little smile. "That is why you and I met in the first place, is it not? So that you might ease your burdens?" A slow grin spread across his face. "I suppose that was part of the reason." But then he took her hands and grew solemn. "But now we are something more. The fact that I am here is proof of that. The fact that the fact the fact the fact the fact the fact the fact the the fact that
Hello?
This is just
Okay, so YouTube will play. Why won't you play? Am I really gonna have technical issues right now? Is that what we've decided needs to happen? Okay. Fucking gremlin swiftness. It's not okay with me. It's not cool. Oh, won't you stay with me? Oh, darling, stay with me.
The fact that
There we go.
I am here is proof of that. This is not for gold, and I do not want it to be. Tonight is not for me, but for us, or so I hope. Her thumb rubbed the back of his palm. So I hope as well. He smiled and took a sip of his wine, but his eyes widened as soon as it touched his tongue, and he tilted the cup to look inside. Stars and sky, where did you get this? She waved a hand airily. Somewhere. Sometimes I receive gifts, and sometimes those gifts are wine, for my clients do not often ask me what I prefer to drink. She gave him a secret smile, and he blushed. For a long while, he too had assumed she liked wine, until he learned of her love for mead. When that is the case, and when they do not wish to drink it with me immediately, I bring it here to save for a special occasion. Tonight is the first time I have opened one of the bottles I have saved. You must have a fine store, then. She laughed and slapped his wrist. You will be well sated, you drunkard. Though he chuckled, Eben soon fixed her with a look. Adara, there is something I meant to ask you tonight, ever since you first invited me here. Only, I do not wish to give offense. Oh? Her eyes grew careful. Then is it wise to ask your question at all? I hope so, he said. If I am wrong, forgive me. But understand, I am overjoyed to be here. I can scarcely tell you how honored I am that you wished to bring me into your life. But why? Why me in particular? She softened at once. Because I love you, Eben. Do you not believe that? You have said so, and I do believe you, he said. And yet, I wondered why. I am nothing special. No, do not look at me like that, nor argue. I do not say this to earn words of praise. I am not special. I am no great man. There is little about me that is remarkable, other than my family, who few hold in very high regard. Adara did not answer him at once, but leaned back in her chair and gave him an appraising look. Then she stood and came to him, and sat so that she was side-saddle in his lap. A boy who is usually foolish and sometimes wise said that love often springs forth unbidden. He blushed, for he remembered those words. He and Adara had whispered them often enough since he first uttered them. But honestly, he pressed, have you never thought upon it? I have.
Who is that gorgeous woman?
I just need a piece of paper.
Oh, I see. You've only come to use me.
That's what I've been doing for 14 years.
13.
Using you for your penis.
Megan fucking Robinson. They're right there.
Okay.
Please, take your paper and get the hell out. Jesus Christ.
Did I make my husband blush?
Go away from me right now. Hey, I love you.
I love you.
Close the door.
Wow, just bossed me around.
Jesus Christ.
Have you never thought upon it? I have, she said, so quickly that it surprised him. Here is the truth, and you have begged me not to take offense at your question, so I will ask you to do the same with my answer. I did not love you from the moment I set my eyes upon you, Eben. I think your love for me may have begun that night, but to me you were a guest, like any other. Though I saw at once that you were an uncommonly sweet one, and uncommonly sweet one, and you were a reminder of Idris, of home, which lent you some slight favor. But when you came to see me the second time, I gave you a lover's words, as I would have done for anybody else. She leaned in then, and pressed herself against him, and kissed him deep. And then the seat was attacked. She murmured, You were an utter fool to come after me when you saw Cyrus escorting me through the streets. Yet that foolishness endeared you to me. And then you risked your life to save me after I learned of Cyrus's evil. I could not love someone only because they were sweet. I could not love someone only because affection made them foolish. And I could not love someone only because they would give their life for mine. But you were all three at once, and in the same person. And love sprang forth unbidden, for you never spoke lover's words to me. It was hard for him to speak for a moment, and so he only held her. But that is because I am not a lover, he finally said. Adara shook her head. That is not what I mean. Lovers' words go two ways. A lover tells a guest what they want to hear, but guests also lie to their lovers. The guest will speak of their lover's endless beauty, and say they wish they could be wed, and say they would buy the lover a palace if they could. But if given the chance to fulfill such whispered promises, most guests would refuse. And that is no evil thing. A lover delivers not only the pleasures of the flesh, but the pleasure of dreaming a perfect romance together, a love greater than true life will permit. Lover and guest both know that dream will never come true, but it is a precious dream nonetheless. The day the seat was attacked, I realized you had never spoken a lover's word to me. You loved me in truth. I do not know when after that I knew I loved you in return. One day I simply did. He smiled at her. And that has never happened before? You have never fallen in love? Everything about her changed at once. Her posture, the look on her face, and her smile, and he saw it. Inside, he winced. Adara stood and returned to her seat. Before I answer that, I would ask you something. Would it bother you if I had? Quickly, he shook his head. I am sorry, he said. That was wrong of me to ask. I never meant to throw doubt on your feelings for me. I only... You thought to stoke your own pride, she said with a wry smile, to prove to yourself that you were the only one. Well, puff up your chest, my love. You are the first guest who has ever stepped into my dwelling. He hung his head. He had made an ass of himself after all. I am sorry, my love. You deserve someone with a smoother tongue than mine, for it trips over itself no matter my intent. A moment's silence stretched as she drank deep from her mead. Her eyes glinted. Your tongue is not so bad as all that. His heart leaped, until the moment was shattered by a pounding at the door below. Eben was on his feet in an instant, but no faster than Adara. Their eyes met. He shook his head. I am expecting no one, he whispered. Nor I. The pounding sounded at the door again. He ran to the left window. The sash was drawn, and he pulled it aside, trying to look down. But the angle was bad, and he could not see the street just before the door. Adara went to the other window, but from the look on her face it was clear she could see nothing more than he could. Hide yourself, he hissed. I will see who it is. Do not be an idiot. She went to her cupboard. From its bottom drawer she pulled a long knife. This is my home. Before he could even try to stop her, she had pounded down the stairs and thrown open the door. Eben was a half step behind her as she thrust the knife out into the street. Mako looked down at the blade and arched an eyebrow. Eben felt thunderstruck. For a moment he could not so much as speak. Fortunately, he did not have to, for Adara did instead. Who are you? She said. What do you want? For a moment, Mako did not answer. Then he moved, making Eben flinch, but he only took a step back so that he did not impale himself on Adara's dagger when he gave a deep bow. I beg your every pardon, my lady, for this intrusion. To disturb you was my last wish. I only sought my master, Eben of the family Drayden. He is the boy standing there just behind you. Eben gawked. Adara glanced back at him. He nodded, and slowly she withdrew her dagger. Mako, seeing the motion, straightened from his bow, and then he fixed Eben with a hard stare. Come with me, little gold shitter. There is work to be done. Chapter 7. After bidding Adara a hasty farewell and promising to return as soon as he could, Eben followed Mako into the streets. The moment they had turned a corner, he seized the bodyguard's arm to pull him around. Mako gave the hand on his elbow a hard look, but Eben did not care. "How did you know I was there? I have not even seen you since we fought with Isra. Where have you been?" "You have never been curious about my whereabouts before," said Mako. "I thought it was because you did not wish to know. Nor have you ever asked how I knew where you were. It is a sort of assumed truth between us, is it not?" Mako turned and stalked off. Eben's nostrils flared and his hand curled to a fist at his side. But what could he do? Striking Mako would do no good, even if the bodyguard did not strike back, which seemed doubtful. He hurried to trot after Mako's retreating back. In truth, he was terrified that Mako knew where Adara lived. But then, as he thought of it, it seemed likely that Mako had had that knowledge for some time. In fact, it would not surprise Eben if Mako knew the dwelling of every denizen on the seat, and their families across the 9 kingdoms besides. That was, after all, part of his duty, not only as a Drayden bodyguard and messenger, but also as their assassin. Something of Eben's thoughts must have shown in his face, for Mako laughed at him. "You may unclench yourself, little Eben. Your lover is in no danger from me." "Oh? And what about from Shay?" Mako's mouth soured in an instant. "From what we have learned of your father, I certainly will not be reporting anything to him. About Adara or anything else." Rather than bringing comfort, the words further darkened Eben's mood. Except instead of anger, he felt a cold fear. He saw Matami's gaping eye socket, heard his uncle's screams. And then he remembered their fight against Isra, when the girl struck with her magic. But Mako stood untouched and leaped forwards with his dagger. Her magic had been powerless against him, and Eben still did not know why. "You are very silent, Eben," said Mako. "Come, speak. What do you wish to tell me?" Eben swallowed hard. Some urgent voice in the back of his mind told him not to speak of what he had seen during the fight. "You mentioned my father. It brought an unpleasant memory to the fore." "Does Matami still plague your thoughts? If everyone were so naive as you, there would be no more war in Underrealm." "Never mind that now," said Eben. "I must tell you something about Isra. Last night, in the academy." "She appeared," said Mako. "I know it, boy. That is why I have come to see you in the first place. Did you think I sought to converse for my pleasure? I do not think either of us have enjoyed ourselves so far." Eben looked around. He did not recognize the streets they passed through. A twinge of nerves struck him. "Where are we going exactly? You cannot know where she is already." Mako snorted. "Of course not. You are more craven than that old instructor of yours, Eben, and it suits you ill. I wish we were going to see her now, so that I could end the little girl once and for all." "Then where?" "You would do well to learn patience." The next few streets passed in silence. Eben knew only that they were somewhere in the southwest end of the city. Little construction had made its way there, and many buildings were burned or fallen to ruin. This was where the Shades had brought the full strength of their assault, and few who lived here had survived the attack. It seemed the High King did not see fit to rebuild where no one would live afterwards. At last they came to a wrought iron fence that surrounded a wide house of nobility. Wide, but not so tall as the Drayden family's manor, nor as resplendent in its design. Here and there the fence had been bent and broken, so that there were many gaps to slip through. Mako paused, fixing Eben with a look. "One more thing before we enter. With Isra about, you may have need of me, and your lover's messages cannot reach me quickly enough. Do you remember when I snuck you out of the academy?" Eben frowned. "Of course." "There is a piece of alabaster on the ground near that place. You cannot miss it. If ever you must tell me something or need my help, write a note and leave it beneath the alabaster. I will come as quickly as I may." "Very well," said Eben. "But do you think I am in danger?" Mako spread his hands and grinned. "A rogue mind mage is on the loose, and she has the strength of mage stones within her. Do you think anyone at the academy is safe?" That seemed a fair point. Eben looked up at the manor before them. "What is this place?" "It once belonged to the family Skard." Mako looked the place over, his lip curling slightly. "They are one of a merchant family from Dolmun," said Eben. "I know the name." "They left the seat just before it was attacked, and now it may be guessed that they knew of Dolmun's treachery before it happened. They have not returned since." The sky was already darkening above them. Eben gave a weary sigh. "What is this all about, Mako? Curfew is not far off, and I cannot be out this late." "This will not be a long engagement," said Mako. "And besides, if you are late in returning, you will not be the only one." He ducked in through a gap in the fence, crossed the courtyard, and entered the manor through its front door. Eben swallowed hard, wondering what the bodyguard had meant by that comment, before he finally mustered the courage to follow. From the street, the manor looked nowhere near as impressive as the home of Eben's family. But when he crossed the threshold, the sight of the main hall froze him in place and robbed his breath. Far it stretched, 30 paces at least, and lined with hearths to either side. At its head was the greatest fireplace of all, where a fine mantle of marble was likely meant to hold treasures and goblets of silver and gold. The shelf lay bare now. What the invaders had not taken, looters would have stolen since. That is, if the family Skard had not taken their valuables with them when they fled. Running the hall's length was a mammoth wooden table, wider than Eben was tall, and a long bench to either side of it. Where the Drayden Manor had little dining rooms in which the family could take their meals in privacy and comfort, this was a place for feasts, banquets for an entire clan at once, where merchants and servants alike could be seated by station, where their children and the dogs played and tussled on the rugs in the corners. Some of these still remained, those too grease-stained or ratty to be stolen. Though all the hearths lay cold, and the place was lit only by the fading daylight coming through the door, Eben could imagine the hall filled with proud Dolmun warriors, the air ringing with their ululating songs. Then he caught a motion at the other end of the hall, and his breath caught in his throat. But peering deeper, he saw it was Mako, and beside the bodyguard, to Eben's great shock, were Theron and Calum. "What? Mako, what are they doing here?" Theron glowered at him and then at Mako. "We were summoned. Mako told us you were in great peril, and to meet him here at once so that you might be rescued." "And look how quickly they came, boy." Mako's smile was cruel. "We should all be so lucky to have such loyal friends." "Eben, what is going on?" said Calum. Eben could see the fear in the boy's eyes. Calum eyed Mako's cruel knife, and Eben knew he was thinking of the time the bodyguard had drawn blood from Eben's throat with the tip of it. "This sack of dung has lied to us," said Theron. "We are not your lackeys, bodyguard, to be dragged across the seat at your whim." Mako flicked his fingers in the air. "Isra is on the loose, and we must find her. Do you not want that? You may spurn my aid if you wish, but then you must capture her yourself." "Do you think me incapable of it?" Theron drew up to her full height, which was only a pair of fingers shorter than Mako. "I would stand a better chance against her, one wizard against another." "You think I have never killed a mind mage before?" Mako's voice had taken on a dangerous growl. "That is the trouble with you wizards. You are used to being more powerful than everyone you meet, and so you grow overconfident. That is when someone like me arrives to slit your throats." Theron glared back at him, but Eben remembered Isra and how she had blasted Mako with her magic, only to leave him unharmed. A shiver of fear ran through him. Before Mako or Theron could utter another word, Calum stepped between them. He held his hands out to either side, though it was ludicrous to imagine he could stop them with his diminutive frame. "If the two of you have taken sufficient measure of each other, mayhap we could speak of whatever Mako has summoned us for? I would rather not miss curfew." Mako's countenance shifted at once to a kindly smile. "An excellent idea, child. Here is the matter at hand. Ever since last we saw Isra, something has been brewing upon the seat, and I have not been able to wrap my fingers around it." Theron scoffed. "Something? What does that mean? What is brewing?" "If I knew that, do you think I would require your help? I am aware of how desperate I seem, coming to the three of you. But the spies I have tucked into the city's dark corners tell me nothing. When someone gets up to dark business, it sends out ripples. There have been many such ripples of late, but I cannot follow them back to the center. I thought it must have to do with smuggling Isra from the island, but now we know that she is still here." "You are telling us then that you were wrong?" said Theron, arching an eyebrow. Mako's nose flared. "Not all information is as clear as the words on one of your scrolls." Theron nodded. "Of course not. It is easy to imagine how you might have been misled." Eben feared that Mako might strike her, but with great effort he went on. "In any case, now we know she is here, and she seems to have no intention of leaving. I am bringing you into the fold on the slight chance that you may be able to help. Am I wise to do so?" "We will do what we can, of course," said Eben, "but I fear we know nothing more than you." "That may be true," said Mako, "but then you may know something without knowing it. Whatever buzzes within the city, it has something to do with the family Yeren. An odd thing, for recently they have been on their best behavior." That raised Calum's eyebrows. "Yeren keeping their noses clean? That is a wonder." "They were implicated in the attack," said Mako. "The High King had half a mind to purge them from the land, and they only barely avoided that fate. They have been good little children since, but now they have begun to lurk again." "You think they are working with Isra, then?" said Eben. "That is entirely possible, though not certain." Eben thought of Lilith. Surely if Yeren were involved in Isra's doing, then Lilith could be of help one way or another. But even as he opened his mouth to speak, Theron caught his eye. She looked anxious or frightened and gave him a quick shake of her head. Eben closed his mouth again. The silence in the hall had stretched a moment too long, and Mako was peering at them. Theron spoke up quickly. "Yeren working with Isra? It seems unlikely. Her schemes brought them great suffering. Oren was murdered, Lilith was tortured, and would have been executed." Mako shrugged. "That is hardly out of character for the Yerens. Their thoughts and schemes stretch for years, and they are willing to prune some dead branches to ensure a healthy growth." But Eben was not so sure. He remembered Oren's mutilated body and the madness in Lilith's eyes. Surely even the cruelest plan could not stand by such actions. He saw the same doubt in Calum's face. Their hesitation seemed to annoy Mako, for he gave a little growl. "Very well, then. Let us leave the Yerens alone for now. But to search for Isra, I must start in the right place. Tell me what happened when I left you in Zane's home. And I mean all that happened, with no detail added or left out." Eben stiffened in fear and saw it reflected in the faces of his friends as well. Mako saw it, and he smiled as he settled down on one of the benches at the head of the table. "This must be an interesting tale indeed." "As she fled, I tried to stop her," said Eben. "I missed her, but I got hold of the amulet. Kekit's amulet, the one she used to cast Mind Word, and also to hide her magic." I remember it, said Mako. What next? When we ourselves tried to leave, she was there. She had Zane's son, and she took him prisoner. Eben shuddered as he remembered the fear in the boy's eyes, his whimpering cries as Isra dragged him away. She tried to kill Caleb and me, but Theron recovered and saved us. Mako's eyes narrowed. Why did you not give Theron the amulet? She could have stopped Isra, could she not? I had not yet thought of that, said Eben sharply. Then he stopped, and his eyes went wide. Yet, said Mako, his smile widening. You had not yet thought of it, but you did think of it. Theron shook. Darkness take you, Eben. He is trying to help, Eben told her. We will do ourselves no favors by holding back. Yes, Mako, I thought of using Mind Word. For when Isra fled, Dasko arrived. He is an instructor at... I know the man, said Mako, and I think that now I know the rest of your tale. He found you before you could get out of Zane's home, and you were holding the amulet. You thought he would expose you, and you were right to think it. So you gave the amulet to Theron, and she used her mind word to make him forget you had been there. Yes, said Eben. You have it. Theron turned to hide her face. Calem's head drooped, and carefully he took a seat at the table opposite Mako. Eben sighed. To speak the truth so plainly, it was a relief, and yet he wished it had been to someone other than Mako. The bodyguard was studying his fingernails. He drew his knife and began to pick under one of them. I am no wizard, yet it seems I have heard something of Mind Word, that if it is not maintained, it produces a sort of mind sickness in the victim. No one answered him. Theron met Eben's eyes, and he saw how haunted her expression had become. I take it that your silence means I am right, said Mako. If that is so, you did not use Mind Word upon Dasko once and then let him be. You have been using it ever since. We have, said Eben quietly. Theron turned away again. That is excellent, said Mako. Your new Dean Foradar has some knowledge of Yeren, and Dasko will be close in Zane's council, for he is a wise man and well respected at the Academy. Mayhap we can use Dasko to use Zane. What? Said Caleb, straightening at once. We will not use Mind Word on Dasko to control him, but only to make him forget. Keeping his memory empty is one thing, using him to accomplish our own ends. I will not do it, said Theron. She stormed up to the table and slammed her hands down on it. The heavy sound of the blow echoed around the hall, flitting about its many pillars. I will not, and that is the end of it. He is like a puppet on strings, and I feel more of a monster every time I jerk them. Mayhap I do not suffer from Magestone sickness, but this is its own kind of torture. We will not use him for evil, said Mako. His tone was gentle, as though he were persuading a wounded animal. We will only collect information we cannot get ourselves, and that information could do great good. It could even save the life of the boy, Eren. Eren could already be dead, said Eben. He likely is. It has been more than a week. I know something of these matters, said Mako. One does not take a hostage if one does not intend to use them. And through Dasko, we could learn something that... Stop saying that, cried Theron. Stop saying we when you mean me. We are not committing a crime. I am. We will not be put to death if this scheme is discovered. I will. We are with you to the end, Theron, said Eben quietly. We have been there every step of the way. If the King's Law learns of our dealings, we will not abandon you to die alone. And if you refuse this scheme, I, for one, will not argue against you. We cannot do it, said Caleb. If we do, we are little better than those we hope to expose. Evil cannot defeat evil, but only strengthens it. Mako stood suddenly from the table, and his eyes had grown hard again. This is not a council. My duty is to see to Eben's safety. And if you call him your friend, girl, then your duty is the same. The next time you use your power on Dasko, have him tell you what Zane knows of Yeren, as well as anything he knows about where Isra went. I assure you, Dean Foradar will have been most earnest in his searching. Theron did not answer him for a moment, but looked to Eben. He gave her a little shrug. It is your choice. She sighed. Very well. I will ask him, but I will not command him to go digging any further. Mako smiled. Good enough, I suppose, for now. In that case, the three of you had better scuttle off back home. I have heard that curfew draws near.
All right. Time for me to take a short break. Gonna go walk around the house for a few minutes. Be right back. Hey, we back. All right. Time to continue.
Chapter 8. The streets had grown colder still, for the sun was almost gone. They hurried between the snowdrifts, moving quickly for warmth, as well as for the lateness of the hour. Eben waited until they had left the manor a few streets behind before he spoke to Theron. "When I almost spoke of Lilith, you stopped me. Why?" She gave a nervous look over her shoulder. "I wish you would not speak of her even now. I feel like that man has ears everywhere, even among us." "He is nowhere in sight, and I am no traitor," said Caleb. Theron sighed, and the frost of it whipped around her face as they hurried on. "I fear that if Mako knew of our closeness, well, my closeness to Lilith, he might think of her as a target, especially now that he is so interested in the doings of the family Yeren. And I think that we have already put her through enough. We pursued her when she was innocent, and she was put to the question because of it. I wish to cause her no more harm." "I see that," said Eben. "Yet if Yeren is truly a threat, and they are behind Isra's crimes, Lilith could be most helpful. She might even help us save Eren's life." "You sound too much like your bodyguard," Theron spat. "I thought you had no wish to be like the rest of your family. Yet I hear their echoes in your words." "Leave Mako out of it, then," said Eben. "But we must stop Isra as quickly as we can. I have not forgotten the sight of Oren's corpse, nor Credel's, nor poor little Vali's." "And do you think I have?" Her eyes flashed. "She has left a longer trail of bodies than that, though how can I blame you for remembering only the gold bags among them?" Eben stopped walking and squared his shoulders, looking her in the eye. "That is not fair." She glared back for a moment, but then she sagged. "I am sorry. I know you do not think of it that way. It is only... Eben, I am frightened." "We all are," said Caleb. He put an awkward hand on her arm. "Who knows when Isra will appear again?" Theron shrugged. "Who cares for Isra? I am afraid for Dasko and for the mind word I keep him under. I am afraid for all of us and what will happen if we are discovered. And I am afraid to use the mind word to pry information from Dasko's mind. I never wanted this power, and now I cannot stop using it." They stood a moment in silence. Then Eben tossed his head. "Come. Time stops for no one." They fell into step beside him. "I feel your fear as well, but we could at least speak with Lilith. Mayhap she can help, and mayhap not. If not, we can leave it alone, and it will never reach Mako's ears at all." She sighed. "Mayhap. Let me think on it. It is no decision to make lightly." "Of course." They reached the academy a little while later, and no sooner had they passed through the front door than the curfew bell rang. Theron redoubled her pace, making for the white cedar doors that led out to the grounds. "I am almost late. I will see you both on the morrow." But Eben increased his pace to keep up with her. "I will come with you." "And I as well," said Caleb, who scampered along with them. Theron did not stop moving, but she tried to wave them off. "There is no need. I can do it myself easily enough. I have the practice, certainly." "I told you, Theron, we are in this together." He caught the faintest quiver in her chin. "Very well," she said, her voice wavering. "Thank you both." The grounds were as cold as the streets had been, but better lit, for the groundskeepers had already been around to kindle the lanterns. They went for the place in the hedges where they always met Dasko. He was there when they arrived, sitting by himself on a stone bench. Calum waited at the entrance to the sitting area, standing just out of view where he could keep watch. Dasko stood as soon as he saw them. Eben stopped short. He had not been so close to the man in some time, a week at least. Something about him seemed off. It was not just his face, which had grown a touch gaunter, nor the gray at his temples, which seemed to have spread some little way into the rest of his hair. It was a weariness, a thinness, as though the instructor were only half there and half an elf dream. But mayhap Eben was only imagining that. So far as he knew, no one else had remarked on Dasko acting strange. Theron reached into a pocket of her robe, and Eben knew she was holding the amulet of Kakit. "You will not remember that you have seen us here tonight," she began. "You will return here tomorrow just before curfew and remain until I come to see you. If anyone asks, you will not tell them why you are here waiting, but will invent some excuse." "Yes," said Dasko, nodding. Eben shuddered at the lifeless monotone in his voice. Calum and Theron had explained a bit to him in the days since they had first placed Dasko under control. Theron had thoroughly erased his memories of these meetings. If they released Dasko from Mindward, the danger was that he might remember them. Even if he did not, there might be gaps in his memory, and he would start showing withdrawal from the control. That would prompt an investigation by the faculty, and that could lead to Eben and his friends.
Hey, what's up, Miak? Sorry I didn't see you arrive. Welcome, welcome, welcome.
Their position seemed untenable. Often Eben felt that they were drawing a blanket over an ever-widening hole in the floor and hoping they would not get into trouble when some unwitting child fell into it and broke their neck. Theron gave him an uneasy look. Eben nodded at her. "It is your choice," he said quietly. She sighed and turned to Dasko. "Tell me what the Academy faculty knows of Isra's reappearance." "We know nothing," said Dasko. Again his voice made Eben shudder. It was like hearing a corpse speak. Theron shook her head. "Tell me what the Academy faculty suspects of Isra's reappearance." "Most think Isra must be getting help from inside the Academy," he said. "There will be an investigation to unearth anyone she may be using. We will look for anyone who shows signs of being under Mindward." Theron stiffened. Eben's heart leaped to his throat, and he spoke. "How would you find someone being held in Mindward?" Dasko said nothing. Theron gave an exasperated sigh.
Audiobooking's good. Enjoying this one. It's been a while since I recorded it.
"Tell me how you would find someone being held in Mindward." "There are sometimes gaps in the memory, for Isra would not want the victim to remember seeing her," he said. "Therefore she would command them to forget the meeting." Eben and Theron looked at each other. "If they question him, he could lead them to us," said Eben. "Yes," said Dasko, surprising them both by speaking without being prompted. "In fact, Dean Foradar already strongly suspects you, Eben." "Tell us who else suspects us," said Theron. "No one," said Dasko. "Gia thinks Zane's suspicion is paranoia, born of his hatred for Eben's family." "Still, we should do what we can to hide the effects of Mindward," said Eben. Theron nodded. "I think I know how. Dasko, when you leave here tonight, you will remember being out upon the grounds, but you will remember it as if you were alone. You will not remember speaking to anyone, and you will not remember hearing anyone speak to you. You will remember all of our previous visits the same way. You have been visiting the grounds alone each night, on your own, and speaking to no one." "Yes," said Dasko. "Leave us now. Enter the academy, and then forget." "Yes." He left them, slipping out through the gap in the hedge. Theron sank down onto the bench, her whole body going limp as though she had just run a league. Eben quickly took a seat beside her and put a hand on her shoulder. Caleb came in a moment later, his eyes filled with concern. "I am sorry, Theron," said Eben. She looked exhausted, but when she lifted her head to look at him, he saw the weariness was in her eyes, a bone-sunk debility of the soul. "It is wrong, Eben," whispered. "This is wrong. I know it is, and yet I cannot stop. How can I go on, committing a new evil every night?" "We are only keeping ourselves safe for now," he said, "and we will come to a solution. I promise you. We will not rest until this is over." "Of course we will not rest," she said. "I can barely even sleep these days." Eben stood and held out his hand. She took it and allowed him to pull her to her feet. They made their way towards the academy with arms over each other's shoulders, not to remain upright, but merely for comfort. Then they opened the white cedar door and nearly ran into Dean Foradar. Zane stopped short just before they hit him, and though the children took a hasty step back, he did not move. He had eyes only for Eben, and disgust burned in his gaze. "Dean Foradar," murmured Caleb. "What were you doing out upon the grounds?" said Zane. "Curfew has been called." "It is not against the rules," said Theron, but some of her usual fire had left her voice. "It is cold out," said Zane. "After an encounter like you all had last night, most students would wish to remain inside, where the danger seems less." "Are we in danger upon the academy grounds?" said Eben, meeting Zane's stare. He was growing more and more fed up with the man's unreasoning hatred of him. "Is it not your job to protect us? I seem to remember that you made such a pledge when you first came here." "It is my job to protect the academy," said Zane, "from threats within as well as without. Sometimes it is hard to tell the difference. Other times it is quite clear." Caleb quailed, but Theron drew herself up. "You have been wrong about such things before, Dean. Mayhap you see threats where none exist." Zane stared her down. For a moment Eben feared they might come to blows, the way they had when Zane had attacked him in the dining hall. Then, without a word, the dean stalked away. "Darkness take him," muttered Theron. "He is a suspicious man," said Caleb, shaking his head. "Yet who can blame him? These are dark times, and his son is missing. Come, I am weary, and I suspect the two of you feel much the same." They made for the stairs, and then up to their dormitories to sleep. Chapter 9.
Hey, done chapter. I might not be able to keep going forever tonight. Hey, welcome to the last day of September, everybody.
Chapter 9. In the library the next day, they reunited in their favorite spot on the 3rd floor. The place was even darker than usual. That part of the library had never been very well kept, and now the faculty had suffered losses, so that many of the lanterns stayed unlit. Calum took one from the wall out in the main area and set it on the table beside them so that they could read by its fiery glow. But reading did not come easy. Eben struggled to keep his mind upon the book in his hands, a weighty tome entitled The Conquering of Idris, a telling of the fall of the Tomb Kings. Idris was his home, and he had thought the subject might hold his attention. But too often he caught himself staring off at nothing. It did not help that the book was written in a dry and informational style, with no attempt to make the events more interesting. Not that they needed much embellishment. The magic of the Tomb Kings of old was well renowned and well feared. His distraction was aided by weariness, and often his head drooped towards his lap. He had spent another sleepless night in the common room of his dormitory, dozing off only in little fits and starts. After they had sat there for mayhap an hour, Theron gave a frustrated little growl and slammed her book shut. "Enough of this. I am through pretending to study when all of us know we are doing nothing of the sort." Calum looked up blinking from his book, shaking his head as though he had forgotten they were there. Well, except for Calum, I suppose." Theron folded her arms across her chest. "But I cannot even see the words on the page. Do neither of you wonder what she is waiting for?" "Who?" said Calum, eyes still foggy. "Isra, of course, you idiot," Theron snapped. "It has been 2 days since we saw her. Why has she not struck again?" "I had not wondered, for I have been thinking about Erin," said Eben.
Hey, what's up, Rev? Good to see you. I am indeed working late.
"Where on all the seat could she be hiding him?" "There are many abandoned buildings upon the seat after the attack," said Caleb. "Marco himself took us to one of them." "But that is just it," said Eben, leaning forwards. "He must have searched out all such places by now. They would be the easiest to search. If Erin were in one of them, Marco would know something of it. Isra must be staying in some place where there are other people, and she can rely upon their secrecy to conceal her. Then let us catch her, and throw her to the mystics so they may put her to the question," said Theron with a glower. "Only that leaves the same mystery as before. What is she waiting for?" Eben shrugged. "It has been nearly 2 weeks since we fought her in Zane's home. She took her time to plan the attack in the dining hall. Now that we have foiled it, she will likely be even more careful in her plotting, especially now that she has revealed herself." "That will take more time that we do not have," said Theron. "Mayhap the story I planted in Dasko's mind will hold, mayhap not. I have never had to hide—" Theron stopped short, looking about to make sure no one was close enough to hear. "I have never had to hide mind word before. What if I did it wrong? What if they find us? I should throw the amulet into the Great Bay and have done with it." Calum's eyebrows raised. "That may be a fair idea now. Dasko would show mind word sickness, but the faculty might ascribe it to Isra's doing. I would still rather we told the truth of what happened, but this is a good half measure." But Eben frowned. "And what if Isra returns? She has this strength of mage stones in her, and no one can resist her without the amulet. Mayhap we should leave it somewhere for the faculty to find instead. We could slide it beneath Gia's door when no one was looking. Then Zane would have it, and he could use it to stop Isra." "He would not," said Calum sadly. "The faculty would never use its powers. That would be a crime against the king's law, and punishable by death." "I know it is," Theron burst out, before quickly lowering her voice again. "That is why I hate this, why all my waking hours are a torment, and yet I cannot sleep. I know full well what awaits me at the end of this journey, but I cannot stop walking the road." Her arms and legs were shaking, and her knuckles were white from their grip on the arms of her chair. Eben looked away, for he felt her pain as if it were his own. And then, suddenly, an idea struck him. He looked at his friends, wondering that he had not thought of it at once. What if we find her ourselves? Theron and Calum stared at him. "What do you mean?" said Calum. "Well, either ourselves or with Mako's help," said Eben. "If we capture her and subdue her, and then put the amulet upon her before we turn her over to the faculty, then our problem is solved. They will assume she had it all along. Zane will have no choice but to accept that we are innocent." Calum frowned, and even Theron looked doubtful. Yet he watched them think on it, and saw the spark of the idea blossom to flame within their minds. "I would still have to keep the amulet," said Theron, "at least for now." "Yet you could release Dasko from your control immediately," said Eben. "You no longer need to hold him under mindward." "If she were discovered," said Calum. "How could that happen?" said Eben. "You have a good hiding place for it, Theron, or so I assume, since you do not carry it with you everywhere, and we can finally put this dark chapter behind us." Theron spread her hands. "Let us say it is true. We must still find Isra, but we have no idea how." "I think we must start with Yeren," said Eben. "Even Mako thinks they may know something." Her eyes hardened. "You mean to bring Lilith into this?" He leaned forwards, counting the steps on his fingers. "If we do, everything falls into place. We release Dasko from our control. With Lilith's help, I say, not coercion, we track down who in her family is helping Isra. We know they must be. It is where she is getting her mage stones. We capture Isra, and then we turn her over to the King's Law with the amulet in her pocket, and everything will be over." Theron looked desperately hopeful, but Calum sat deep in thought. After a moment, he shook his head. "It is a lie and a great risk as well. We have other resources, more than Mako, I mean. Eben, you could ask Adara. The Guild of Lovers has 1,000 ears, and they are always listening." "I have hope for Mako, and I already mean to speak with Adara. This very night, in fact," said Eben. "But Lilith may best them all, for she is closest to the source of the mage stones. Yes, it means we must lie, but I am willing to bear that burden, for you and I have the least to lose as things stand. This plan helps Theron more than you or me, Calum." Theron studied her fingernails, and then put one in her mouth to tear at it with her teeth. Calum and Eben watched her. "Let us try it then," Theron muttered. "It cannot be worse than living this way." "Then we must take the first step," said Eben. "We must speak with Lilith." "But she is still Lilith," said Calum. He shivered. "I have had difficulties enough with her in the past. Now that I am one of those who helped throw her to the mystic's knives, I suspect she will be even less kind than before." "We have no choice," said Eben. "We must bring her to Mako so that she can help him in his search." "No," Theron snapped. "Not Mako. I will not bring him anywhere near Lilith, nor will you." "But Theron, he is the best chance we have at—" She held up a hand to cut him off. "No. Remember your Uncle Matami." He fell silent at once, seeing Matami's brutalized corpse in his mind. "Think on it," said Theron. "What if Mako decides that Lilith knows more than she is telling? Will he drag her down into the sewers to do to her what he did to your uncle? She is not even his kin. Do you think he will be more reluctant to kill her than another Drayton?" "Lilith is a youth, like us," said Eben, but the words sounded weak even in his own ears. "I do not believe for a moment that that will save her. If we mean to work with Lilith, we will do it on our own. Mako will only put her in greater danger." Calum nodded in agreement, and so Eben shrugged. "Very well." But even as he said it, he thought of how helpful it would be to have Mako's counsel in this. He did not trust the bodyguard exactly, or even like him very much. Yet Mako had proven his worth time and again, and had saved the children's lives more than once. "If we mean to speak with Lilith, why wait?" said Calum. He put his book aside and stood from the armchair. "Let us find her. Her schedule is the same as ours, and she should be in the library somewhere." They rose together and set out to find her. Quickly they scanned the shelves of the whole third floor, but there were few students scattered among them, and Lilith was not there. The second and first floors took longer to search, for they were much more crowded, and Eben and his friends earned several curious looks as they poked their heads in between bookshelves. But in the end, they stood together on the bottom floor, and Lilith was nowhere to be seen. "Has she returned to her dormitory?" said Caleb. "I know she has been granted special permissions to rest, if she wishes, after what she suffered." "She has not," said Theron. In her voice was a sorrow Eben could not place. "Come, we will have to sneak out of the library. I know where she is."
Chapter 9 done. And a dum bum bum bum. Eh?
Chapter 10. Gia had not returned to duty after being placed under Mindward the day before last. Another instructor had replaced her in the library's afternoon study period. Her name was Uma, and she was short and plump, with eyes that seemed too large to work properly, and they were always blinking. One by one, Eben and his friends excused
Well, I don't know what it is, but my voice on this day of recording is really doing something for me.
One by one, Eben and his friends excused themselves to use the privies, and then met each other in the hallways outside. Theron took them around a wide, looping route through the Academy's less traveled passages. At one point, they climbed to the second floor, creeping among the younger children's dormitories where the space rang hollow and empty. "Where are you taking us?" Caleb whispered. "Hush, and you shall find out soon enough," said Theron. They descended to the first floor again. Now they were in a part of the academy where Eben had seldom been. He knew some of the doors must lead to teachers' offices, and these they flew by in a rush. At last, Theron stopped before a thick oaken door. It had a lock, and the keyhole was very large. Theron tried the handle. "Locked," she said with a sigh of relief. "That means that Karog is not here." "Who is Karog?" said Eben. "The bell-keeper," said Caleb, looking at Theron with awe. "Is this the bell tower?" "It is," said Theron. "It is where we will find Lilith." "How can you know?" said Eben, but she only gave him a steely look and did not answer. Kneeling, she peered into the lock and extended a finger. From behind her, he saw the glow of her eyes. A soft click came from within the lock, and the knob twisted in her hand. Quickly, they all filed in through the door, and Theron locked it again behind them. They stood in the base of a wide, round tower with a stairwell that ran around the outer wall to the roof far above. Many windows pierced the walls, letting in shafts of light that crisscrossed each other in the air, illuminated by the dust motes that danced within them, so that looking up from the ground was like seeing a honeycomb made of the sun's glow. At the very top, they could see the Academy's great bell. Eben had only viewed it from the streets of the city, where it seemed much like any other bell. From here, however, it seemed a massive thing, at least as large as a house, and its bronze glow in the sunlight nearly blinded them. "Come," said Theron. "We should climb as fast as we may, for there is no place to hide down here if Karog should return." "I have heard she is half blind anyway," said Caleb. "That may be, but she has ears like a cat. Quickly!" She leaped up the stairs, two at a time. Eben and Caleb hastened to follow, but after only a few flights they both wheezed and gasped as they clutched at the stone handrail. Theron hardly slowed at all. When they had almost lost sight of her, she stopped and turned to look at them in disgust. "Honestly, how do the two of you survive? Most noble children are not so frail." "Most noble children learn to be warriors, especially firstborn," said Caleb. "They are not bookish." "You claim that word as though it is something prideful," said Theron, arching an eyebrow. "To some it is." She slowed her pace, though she kept prodding and urging them to go faster. But Eben grew more and more uncomfortable the higher they climbed. Soon he had to press himself against the wall for he thought he might vomit if he caught sight of the floor far, far below them. He had never been overly fond of heights. It seemed an eternity before they reached the top. When they did, Eben and Caleb collapsed to the floor, wheezing. Eben scooted quickly away from the edge, for though the railing between him and the open air was thick and strong, still it made him nervous. But the other direction hardly seemed better, for about 5 paces away was the edge of the tower, and the railing there was made of thin wooden poles. His stomach turned again, and he pressed his fingers hard against the wooden floor, as though he could catch it in his grip and hold on to it. Theron stood there before them, dwarfed by the mammoth bell beside her, looking all around. There were a few boxes and crates of things about, though Eben could not guess what they held, as well as many coils of rope stacked in the corners. Theron inspected them, eyes narrowed. "Lilith?" she said softly. "It is Theron. I know you are here." The tower was silent. Caleb looked to Eben uncertainly. Eben only tried not to look at the tower's edge. But after a moment, they heard shuffling footsteps. Lilith stepped out from behind the coils of rope, a deep scowl embedded in her features. Eben was startled at the sight of her. He had not seen her plainly in some time. Even against the darkness of her skin, he could see the fading remnants of bruises where she had been beaten. Her academy robes covered most of them, but the fabric did not hide her face, and while her sleeves covered most of her hands, he spotted the pale pink of scars on the tips of her fingers, which were thin and wasted like a starving child's. And her eyes were an animal's, filled with the futile indignation of a fox brought to bay, showing its teeth without hope. "What are you doing here?" she snapped. "I needed to speak with you," said Theron. "What are they doing here?" She turned eyes of fury on Eben and Calum, who had, without realizing it, retreated halfway behind Theron. Eben steeled himself and stepped forwards to stand at Theron's shoulder. "We need your help, Lilith." Lilith ignored him, looking only at Theron. "I never brought Oren or Nella into the bell tower. Never." Theron looked as though she had been slapped. I did not know that. But I would have brought them even if I did know. Isra has returned, and she has mage stones. We think she is getting them from your family." For a moment, whistling wind was the only sound. Then Lilith's eyes widened and her lips twisted to a snarl. "You think I have something to do with it?" she screamed. "You think I would set eyes on Isra without catching her in a blaze? She killed Oren! She did this!" She held up her hands before her face so that the sleeves of her robe fell to her elbows. Beneath were tight underclothes of wool, proof against the cold, which she dragged down to reveal her skin. Calum gasped, and Eben's stomach lurched. The scars on her fingers were not the half of the harm that had been done to her. Pink lines of torn flesh raced down the length of her arms, crisscrossing each other over and over. Some looked to still be healing. Theron's mouth worked, but she said nothing. Eben saw tears spring to her eyes, threatening to flood forth. He stepped forwards, drawing Lilith's baleful gaze away from Theron and onto himself. "I am sorry," he said. "We all are. You deserved none of what you received, and Isra was not alone in the blame for it. We were just as guilty." For a moment he wondered if she had even heard him, for her expression did not change. Finally she turned, stalking away to the other side of the bell tower. "Go away," she said over her shoulder. "I want nothing to do with any of you." Eben let loose a whoosh of breath and heard Calum do the same, but Theron, unmoving, only watched Lilith go. "It was wrong of us to ask this of her," Theron murmured. He wondered if she was right, but then he remembered Isra in the kitchens and felt again the blast of the artifact she had tried to use to kill them. Eben squared his shoulders, and then he took Theron and Calum's arms. "We are not done yet," he said quietly. "Come." They set off along the platform after her. She had gone to sit on the edge of the tower, her feet hanging off the lip while she held on to the thin wooden railing. Eben's stomach did a turn at that. She did not look up, even as their feet scuffed to a stop behind her. "I do not blame you for wanting to turn us away," said Eben. "Indeed, Calum had no wish to come to you, for you have never been kind to him, and Theron felt the same, for we have been far too cruel to you already. I cringe at the thought of trusting you in this after the way we met. But Theron has spoken to me of you, and of the nobility she still sees in your heart, and her belief has convinced me." Lilith turned. Her gaze locked with Theron's, and Eben saw her expression soften at the same time he felt Theron tense beside him. But it lasted only a moment before Lilith looked away again. "I only want to be left alone," she said, but this time softly and without malice. Theron went forth and sat on the stone edge beside her. Eben's gut wrenched even worse, but from the ease with which she sat there, he guessed that Theron had done this many times before. "What was it like when Isra had you under mindward?" said Theron. Lilith shuddered beside her, and she bowed her head. "It was horrible," she said in a low voice. "Still my mind reels when I try too hard to remember it. Some things I can recall, but it is like I watched it happen to someone else. When I entered the vaults, or when Vali... She stopped, remaining silent through several deep breaths. Her scarred, ruined fingers crept up to scratch at her temples. Other things I have forgotten entirely, and there are still other memories which come and go, and when they have gone, I cannot remember having remembered them. It is like a madness. Eben waited a moment. Then he took a step forwards, only one, for he was still terrified of the tower's edge, and said, "That is what Gia suffers even now. Isra has had her under mind control. Mayhap she has others. They will all suffer the same way. I would not ask you to face Isra again, but will you help us find her, so that we may?" Lilith glared at him over her shoulder for a moment, and then turned her face out again. "You are fools if you think my family could have done this. Oren's death and my torture prove their innocence." "Can you be so certain?" said Theron. "From what we have heard, some scion of your house had a hand in the Shade's attack. Mayhap they are also the ones who helped Isra, and may be helping her still." "I know of whom you speak, but she could not have acted alone," said Lilith quickly. "You are saying that others helped spit Oren like a pig, that others left me to scream as the mystics dug their knives into my flesh." Theron hung her head. "These are dark days, filled with dark deeds. Say for a moment that we are right. Would you let such deeds go unpunished?" Lilith closed her eyes, taking a deep breath of the chilled air before letting it out in a rush. "Very well," she said quietly. "I will ask about and see what may be learned, but I will not risk my neck for the three of you. It has been squeezed tight enough already." "Of course," said Theron. She put a hand on Lilith's shoulder. The girl jerked away as if by instinct, but subsided almost at once. "Thank you, Lilith." She rose to rejoin Eben and Caleb, and they set off for the stairs leading down. Just before they rounded the edge of the bell and lost sight of Lilith, Eben glanced back. She had not moved, not even to watch them go.
Chapter 10 done. Sure better. Burr. Murder. Ugh. Gonna go refill my coffee. I'll be right back. Oof. Alright. We're gonna get through chapter 12. And then I'm going the fuck to bed.
Chapter 11. After studies ended that evening, Eben made for the streets and turned his steps towards the blue door in the west. Mako had begun his search, and now they had enlisted Lilith's aid as well. Only one more resource remained to them, Adara, with her fealty to the Guild of Lovers. And besides that, Eben had not been able to spend much time with her the previous night, and hoped to make up for it. The evening was even icier than normal, and he pounded his hands against his arms. He thought at once that he should have brought a second cloak, and considered going back for one. But just when he had made up his mind to do so, he heard the scrape of a boot on stone. Eben froze. He had ducked into an alley, a shortcut between two busy thoroughfares, and it had appeared empty. But the sound had been very distinct, though he could see no sign of anyone behind him now. He took one careful step forwards, and then another. Then he pressed on at a regular pace, trying to convince himself that he had imagined the sound, or that it had been an echo of the noise of his own walking. But such thoughts did nothing to still his heart, which had begun to race. His steps quickened, though he told himself it was only to warm his limbs, and every few paces he glanced back over his shoulder casually, as though he was just looking about to see the sights of the city. Soon he had reached a main street again, and that relaxed him considerably. There were too many people around, constables and mystics and soldiers of all the 9 kingdoms, for him to worry very much about an attack in the open. The black robes of an academy student were distinctive, and wearers of such were known to be under the High King's protection. But the busy street did not last forever, and eventually Eben had to turn. He reached the street and balked. Far down it he could see one trader's cart plodding its way forwards through the snow, but between him and the cart was a great stretch of empty space with no one in sight. He skipped the turn and made for the next street, but it was even more barren, with not a soul to be seen from where he stood to where it vanished in a turn behind the corner of an inn. Eben glanced back along the thoroughfare down which he had come. He saw nothing untoward among the crowds. No one spared him a second glance. He swallowed hard and stepped into the street. Now his footfalls, though muffled, could be heard bouncing from the buildings again. He listened hard, but he heard no steps other than his own, and he could not be sure if he was imagining the feeling of eyes upon his back or if they were there in truth. At last he reached the corner of the inn behind which the street turned. Without slowing, he stopped on the spot and whirled to look behind him. The street was empty. Or had he in fact seen the corner of a gray cloak whipping behind the edge of a nearling? He passed the inn, and now he made no pretense of calm. He ran. The snow clutched at his boots, dragging at him. He imagined fingers beneath its surface, like the waterworks that dragged sailors down to their deaths. Soon he was panting like a horse on the edge of collapse. His breath clouded around his head as if he were casting mists. Mists! Eben, you fool! He had utterly forgotten his magic. Now he darted for the closed mouth of an alley, dark and forbidding, but small, made up only a pace wider than his shoulders. Eben flung himself into its mouth and reached for his power. The alley, which at first had been pitch black to his sight, lightened considerably as his eyes began to glow. He focused on the air touching his skin. He saw it, and he spun mists within it. It sprang from him, flooding out to fill the tiny width of the alley. He was nowhere near as proficient as Calum, but he still managed to extend it a few paces in every direction. It was thick as a stew, so that no one could see through it, but it blocked Eben's sight not at all, for it was born of his magic. He could see the alley's walls clearly, and when it branched off in 2 directions, he made the turn without pausing. But he left the mist where it was, moving through it while it remained at the fork. He could only hold it a moment, but by the time it dissipated, he had already turned the next corner, and the fork was out of... He would have laughed if he were not afraid of being heard. Anyone behind him would be lost now, and just ahead he could see the next main street, where many carts and travelers on horseback crossed the alleys. A blast of air struck him in the chest, flinging him backwards and robbing his lungs of breath. He tried to cry out, but only a thin wheeze emerged. Strong, wiry hands clutched his collar and dragged him upright, around the corner and out of sight of the street. The hands slammed him up against the alley's wall. Eben stared into the eyes of Zane, dean of the academy. "Good eve, Drayden. Where are you off to in such a hurry?" Zane's voice was carefully controlled, but Eben could hear the fury within it. He tried to answer, but Zane's hand pressed against his throat. Hot breath washed over Eben's face, and he smelled wine. Speak not. You are a student. Listening should be your primary concern. I wanted to tell you..." His lip curled. "I wanted to tell you that I received your family's note." Eben blinked. "What?" He barely managed to croak the word. "I will not tell them where she is," Zane growled. "I would die first. I would not let Eren die for her, but then I do not believe you mean to release him, no matter what I do. I know the note's true purpose. It is supposed to make me lash out at your family, mayhap even at you yourself, so that the Draydens will have leverage. Then they can persuade the High King to remove me. Did you think this was a clever plan? Did you think I would not see through it? You were wrong." "I know not..." "Do not speak," hissed Zane. He did not squeeze, but the venom in his words silenced Eben anyway. "You are fools if you think to dupe me with the same ruse as before. Dristan played this game, and it worked for him then. It will not work again. I am wiser now, wise enough to see what you are doing. You may tell your family they have made a mistake. I will find my son. I will prove you took him, and then your names will be purged across the 9 kingdoms. And if Eren has been harmed, I will not be gentle in the purging." He snatched his hand back. Eben fell to the ground, clutching his throat and coughing. Zane looked down on him with malice, his fingers twitching as though he longed to fill them with fire. "Tell your kin, Drayden. Tell them they have but one hope. They may return Eren to me. Bring him to the academy and leave him at the front door. If it is done, I will cease my efforts to destroy them. If it is not, I will not rest until you all burn. Tell them." Eben raised his head to look Zane in the eyes, and despite his fear, he did not waver. "I know not what you speak of. I have nothing to do with your son. Isra took him. She tried to kill me only 2 nights ago. If you think we are in league with her, you are mad yourself." Zane snarled, and blue fire sprang into his palm. He snatched Eben's collar and pressed him to the wall again, and the blue flames swung back. Eben flinched and cried out, pressing back against the wall as though he could sink through it and escape. But then Zane stopped. His gaze locked with Eben's. Slowly the mage light died in his eyes, and when they were clear, Eben saw no fury at all. Instead, he saw only a trace of doubt. "Either you are lying, in which case darkness take you, or you are telling the truth, and you are ignorant of your family's deeds. If that is true, then you are their sacrificial lamb. Either way, you are a walking corpse. Tell them what I have said, quick, lest they use you like bait on the end of a hook." His eyes filled with light, and wind sprang from nowhere. It flung snow up to fill the air, thicker than mist, and Eben had to shield his eyes against the stinging gale. When the wind died down and the snow settled back to the street, Zane had gone.
Chapter 11 done. Alright, last chapter of the night. And I gotta go the fuck to bed. I am already like, woof, passing out in my chair here.
Chapter 12. For a little while he stood there, every limb shaking, afraid to move, for he thought his legs might give out if he tried. But then he realized he was still in the alley, and still out of sight of the street. So he forced his frozen legs to walk, and soon he was in a crowd again. He had drawn closer to the blue door, and when he saw it at last, he began to shake again, though this time from relief. The door opened easily under his hand, and the matron in the front room looked up expectantly. When she saw Eben, her eyes filled with surprise. "Good eve, young sir," she said. "Adara is in her room and unoccupied." Eben fumbled for his coin purse, but the matron held up a hand with her palm out. "That is not necessary. She has informed us of your new arrangement, and you no longer need bring any gold to visit her here." Eben pulled out a gold weight and placed it in her hand, where her fingers closed around it after only a moment's hesitation. "Take it regardless," he said. "Tonight I do not visit only for love." He let himself through the door and made his way down the hall. His careful knock produced only silence for a moment. Then he heard her hesitant voice, almost a question. "Come in." When he opened the door, she looked even more surprised than the matron had. "Eben," she said, "I thought not to see you so soon." "I thought not to visit tonight," said Eben. "But plans have been altered, and I must speak with you." "Has it something to do with Isra?" Eben looked behind him, but the hallway remained empty. Still, he closed the door and turned the lock. "It does," he said quietly. "Come." She patted the space on the bed beside her. He sat, and at once her hand covered his own, stilling his fidgeting fingers. He smiled up at her. "You are shaking," she said. "What has happened?" He remembered the fury in Zane's eyes, the wine that filled the dean's breath, but he had not come here to speak of Zane. I had thought to ask you for a favor." "If I may grant it without dishonor, then consider it done," she said. "Only, Eben, you must tell me what is wrong." But something overcame him, and he swiped at his eyes with the back of his hand. Now that he was in her presence, the whole encounter with Zane seemed at once distant and forgotten, and yet somehow more real and terrifying. But the last thing he wanted was to weep in Adara's presence, for their time together should be joyous. Adara leaned back with an appraising look, and he flinched, thinking she scorned him. But she stood quickly and took his hands, drawing him up after her. "Come," she said softly. "Let us retire to my home." He had no chance to answer, let alone argue, for she led him out and down the hall at once. The matron asked no questions, but bid them farewell with a nod. It was not long before they were situated in Adara's little room again. As before, she seated Eben at her table by the window, but she did not sit with him. Instead, she went to her cupboard and drew forth 2 glass goblets. No, not glass, Eben quickly saw. Crystal. Each was wrapped with a narrow gold band, and the crystal was carved in intricate, rippled diamond shapes. He marveled at them while she drew wine and mead from a cupboard. "These must have cost a fortune," he said, distracted from his fears for the moment. She shrugged. "I did not buy them. Another gift from a happy guest, and a wealthy one, I wager." Eben grew solemn. "I did not mean to take much of your time tonight, nor reduce the coin you might have earned." I can be brief, and mayhap another time we... Adara stopped short, and one of her fingers rose from the neck of the bottle it held. No, it is my evening, and I will choose how to spend it. Your concern for my work is touching, but I do not lack for coin. He smirked at his goblet. That was something he did not doubt. She came to the table with the bottles and filled both their cups. What do we drink to? He said, raising his cup. She did not raise her own, but only met his gaze for a moment. In her eyes he saw a fresh anxiety. It was the same look she had worn when first she invited him here. Another wall coming down. He leaned forwards. To knowing more of each other, she said. Eben smirked. I hardly think we could know more of each other than we do. That earned him a wicked smile, but it quickly subsided, and her voice grew even more solemn. I should like to get drunk with you, Eben of the family Drayden. He blinked, looking at the cup of wine in his hand. I do not understand. Drunk, inebriated, overfilled with wine until our brains are addled. You cannot be a stranger to the concept. Eben tried to frown, but the sardonic twist of her lips softened him. You know that is not what I meant. Why do you want to get drunk? I have meant to ask you this for some time, she said. With a fingernail she picked at the table, scraping up a bit of its lacquer. Even before before we told each other how we felt. In fact, that was how I first thought I would hear true words of love pass your lips. I thought for certain that they would never pass mine any other way. His hand covered hers, stopping her from scratching the table further. Adara, you need not get me drunk to hear that I love you. Have I not said it enough? 1,000 times will I repeat it, and learn to say it in all the tongues of Underrealm if you wish. I will find the imps and the wurts and the satyrs in their homes, and even the centaurs where they have vanished in Spine Ridge, and learn to speak their words as well, if that is what you want. It is not, she said, rolling her eyes, and you are a fool. Charming, but a fool. It is not the words I hoped to draw from you, for I told you that lovers' words do not only come from lovers' lips. I thought once that you said pleasant things we both wanted to hear, and that I might hear the truth if you were disarmed, shall we say. And I feared to tell you how I myself had begun to feel, and thought mead might make the confession come more easily. Eben leaned back. I see, but you know now that I speak true. You know the same of me, she said, and yet. He looked down at his hands, for he had guessed at her mind. Not long ago he had been shocked to learn she once lived in Dulmoon, yet how could that have surprised him? He had learned nothing else of her life, and she knew little enough of his, beyond his deeds since he had come to the High King's seat. To your life and mine, said Eben. He raised his glass and looked into her eyes, suddenly aware that those sounded far too similar to wedding words. But he did not flinch. She met his look and raised her goblet in turn. To your life and mine, she said. Let them be laid bare, and we the better for it. They both drained their cups. Adara reached at once for the mead to fill hers again, but Eben stopped her and took the bottle to pour it for her. She smiled and poured his cup in turn. Can you tell me now what brought you to my door? She said. Or must I force another goblet down your throat? Eben tried to smile, but his thoughts turned dark again. It was a little matter. Her eyes said she did not believe him. She put her hand over his. Tell me something else, then. A thing of yourself you have withheld until now. Withheld from you? Yes, whatever you wish. Something new. He looked down at her hand, for he had thought of something at once, but even now he hated the thought of telling her, for it stung his eyes and put a lump in his throat. She lowered her head a bit, trying to catch his eye. That, Eben. Remember, your life and mine. I thought of my brother, Momen," Eben murmured. He was afraid if he raised his voice at all, it would break. "I thought of when he died." She waited a moment. When he did not go on, she spoke softly. "What about when he died?" "When I heard the news, I locked myself in my room and did not come out for days. I let no one in. I know they all thought I wept. The truth is, I could not. Tears would not come, no matter how badly I wanted them to, and I was ashamed. I thought I was a monster for not weeping at my brother's death, for I loved him dearly. And I never told anyone about those days locked in my room. I know they all think I shed tears in private, but I never did." By the time he finished speaking, his head had already begun to fog. The wine must have been strong, or else it was the effect of drinking it so quickly. Adara took her hand from his and leaned back, nodding slowly. When she answered him, her words ran together. "I left Idris when I was only a little girl," she said. "My parents brought me to Feldemar with them, for my father had a cousin who promised him a position upon a merchant's caravan. He joined it and was often gone on long journeys. Years he worked for the same merchant and spent more time away than at home. One day I found out my mother had taken a lover in secret, betraying him. The next time he came home, she told him what she had done, and that she no longer loved him. He told her that he, too, had found another. He had met her while journeying in Selvin years before. They screamed at each other for hours, until finally I rose from my bed, slipped out my window, and ran from the house. I have not seen them since." Eben was frozen in his seat. He could scarcely imagine anything worse. Certainly if that had happened to his parents, he would have cared little. His father had never had love for him, and he had always thought his mother would be happier with another. But in Adara's voice he heard an aching, bone-deep sadness, and he knew at once that she had loved her father and mother both. "Is that when you left for Dolmun?" he said quietly. Adara shook her head. "That is another tale, and another cup. We have both told one now. Drink." She followed her own advice, raising her goblet and beginning to drink. Eben drank from his as well, though not half so eagerly as last time. He could feel the drink seeping in at the back of his mind now, like a soundless ringing in his ears, an ecstasy longing to be acted upon. He refilled Adara's cup, and she filled his. "Zane attacked me tonight," said Eben. "Well, I say attacked. He did not harm me. Though I suppose he did, after all, did he not? But not greatly. Not if there is no small red mark here." He pointed to his neck, where he vividly remembered Zane's thumb pressing into his jugular. Adara leaned forwards, blinking twice. "There is not." "Then he did not harm me greatly," said Eben. "But he threatened me. He told me my family sent him a note." "What kind of note?" "Am I telling the story?" he said, but he grinned to soften the words. "He said a note about his son, Aaron, his name is. His son, not Zane. Zane's name is Zane. He said he would not tell us where she was." Adara frowned, looking out the window. "Where who was?" Eben spread his hands helplessly, almost spilling his goblet. He put it back on the table, reflecting that he probably should not have held it when he gestured so. "I do not know. But he would not tell me the information he seemed to think I desired, that much was certain. And he said that if we harmed Aaron, he would destroy us. All of us." "But you do not have Aaron." Eben shrugged. "I have told him that, or rather, I told him that tonight. I have just realized that I never told him that before. I likely should have. Not that it would have been a comfort, for he would not have believed me. And it might have sounded suspicious, defending against an accusation, that had not yet been leveled. But if you do not have Aaron, why would your family have sent him a note? That troubles me. Of course, anyone could have put our name on a scrap of paper, or left it blank, and Zane would have guessed it came from us, for his hatred knows no limits. She looked at him in silence for a moment, and through the fog of wine he saw her eyes glint with appraisal. You do not think Mako would have done it? Even without Aaron in hand, if he thought he could gain something from provoking Zane. The thought had not crossed my mind, yet you are not wrong. He scowled into his goblet. I mean to speak to him tomorrow, for in any case I should tell him what happened with Zane. I will ask him then. Adara nodded sagely at that, as though it were a great wisdom. Then she held up a finger. Your last truth was a truth of the past, and I answered in kind. But the truth you have just told me is a truth of the present, so I will answer with my own. Tonight, a boy behind the blue door told me I was a fool for falling in love with you. He said you were a merchant's son, a gold bag, and that you had tricked me into giving you my services without asking for coin in return. Eben frowned. But that is a lie. She stopped him with a sharply raised hand. I did not ask for your answer. That is the purpose of this. Adara waved a hand in the general direction of the goblets and the bottles. And besides, I gave him my answer already. I told him he was a wool-headed steer, that I had heard complaints from many of his clients about his woeful lack of expertise in our trade, and that he likely received only half of the usual rate for his work. He broke down weeping and fled through the blue door. I hope he never returns. And now we have each told another truth. They both took their time now, sipping gingerly at their cups, but they spoke no words, only met each other's eyes. Eben became aware of her foot atop his under the table. He twitched his leg. She moved her own in response. Mayhap we should finish these goblets upon the bed, he suggested. Are you certain? She gave him a coy smile. We both know wine can trouble your performance. That is why I suggest we move quickly, he said, standing from his chair. Because you have never seen me well and truly drunk, Adara, and so I suggest you make use of me while you may. She laughed easily and took his proffered hand to rise. Cups forgotten, they undressed each other piece by piece. Again she cared for him, and he for her. Then they took their cups and brought them to the bedside tables, huddling together under the warm fur blanket. But they did nothing else. You did not come here to speak to me of Zane, she whispered in his ear. Her hand traced the almost absent lines of his thin, youthful chest. He found you on your way. Why did you come to see me again so soon? He sighed. I came to ask a favor, though I have no great wish to do so. Her hand slid lower. I am amenable to favors. What do you need? Calum and Theron and I, and Lilith. Oh, yes, we have befriended Lilith. Not befriended, that is wrong. We are in league with her. I suppose that is a poor way to put it as well. In any case, we need to know where Isra has gone. She is here on the seat. There must be a trace of her, and you are a lover. Of course. I have many lovers I can turn to. Not... She giggled, and Eben snorted a bark of laughter. Not lovers. That is not what I meant. Other lovers. Lovers like me, I mean. He kissed her deeply. There are no lovers like you. Be silent, flatterer. I will ask them, but I do not understand. Why were you reluctant to ask me this? It is hardly any trouble at all. That sobered him, for the answer had been troubling him greatly. At first my mind was taken by Zane and his threats. And then I still fear for your safety, and more so the further you are drawn into all this. If Isra knew of your existence, I do not doubt that she would come for you just to hurt me. And between the amulet and our mindword of Dasko, and now our investigation of Yeren, I feel as though peril haunts my every step. And I walk well outside the king's law now, though I hate to do it. But you do hate to do it, she said, and that makes the difference. Now you have told me something of the future. I will do the same. One day, not soon, Maya, but one day, I want you to take me back to Feldemar, where I have not returned since I left. He ran a finger through the hair on her temple. Of course. I know not when or how, but I vow that I will do it. Her eyes shone with tears. Dear, dear Eben. Was that a truth? You do not owe me another one. Eben kissed her. I will give you all of my truth, whenever you wish it. To his shock, the tears broke, trickling down her cheeks. One day, I too may be able to do the same. I cannot yet. Not even now. Then she pushed him gently back towards the side table. Now drink. Drink. Oh. Now drink. Now drink.
Chapter 12 done, and I am wrapping for the night. Oh. Excuse me. Okay, everybody. That is it for me tonight. I am positively bushwhacked. Ugh. We'll throw a raid to somebody. We're gonna raid.